because Sega Genesis was like the coolest console ever. There was a war between the SNES and the Sega Genesis. Everybody got an SNES or everybody got a Sega Genesis. It's like one kid always got one of them. And we're going to talk about Sega. Which before I talked about the Nintendo 64, their own Nintendo. Well, today I'll be talking about what really happened to Sega. When back in the early 90s, they had the Sega Genesis, and they had a saying, Genesis does what Nintendo don't. So let's see what happened to Sega. Well, Sega was always had like 16 bits. Everybody thought it was cool, and also the SNES. But the SNES wasn't that generation. But the Sega Genesis still had some, accessories with it, I should call it, or even a console. It was like the Sega 32X or the Sega CD. You had to actually just connect it when it showed been a console. But that didn't really ruin Sega. I mean, no, it was sort of popular, but it wasn't as popular as the Sega Genesis. No. Let's get on to the other stuff. Also, when it was a generation, which I like to call, I don't know. I can't remember my last video, what I call it. Well, anyways, in the 4th generation, I think, the 4th generation, which is the Nintendo 64, and the PlayStation generation, which is the generation that ruined Nintendo, and also Sega big time, because they made the Sega Saturn. The Sega Saturn wasn't really that popular. And also it did have CDs. So they did got one thing right, like the N64 didn't, because instead they used cartridges. But there was one big problem. It was so hard to make games on it. Yeah, because you had to make it on a computer. But just to really tell you the truth, it was so hard to make games on it. Even the game called Sonic Lost World. Yeah, you probably heard of it. It just released on the Wii U and 3DS 2 years ago. And it was actually supposed to come out on the Sega Saturn. But it didn't, because it was so hard to make on the Sega Saturn. And no one really bought it, and the Sega Saturn failed. I'm not really sure how many copies it sold. But I mean, still, some people got it because it was from Sega. But the N64 did way more better than it. So anyways, let's move on to the next generation. The Sega Dreamcast. This was their console and it failed Sega. And this is the reason why Sega stopped making consoles. The Dreamcast. It wasn't more like a dream, it was more like a nightmare. Because they only sold 10.5 million copies. Wait, 10.5. So the Wii U sold 9.2 million copies. Is the Wii U the next Dreamcast? Well, the Dreamcast always, I don't know, it could be the end of Nintendo, the Wii U. Hopefully it's not the end of because sometimes I think the Wii U is the next Dreamcast. But anyways, let's just get started. The Dreamcast only sold 10.5 million copies, which just was horrible for them. And also, back in the day, I heard lots of kids saying that they wanted the Sega Dreamcast so bad because they wanted Sonic Adventure. But I don't even know why the Sega Dreamcast went so down into their sales. When you could go on the internet, yeah, it was the first console where you could go on the internet on. It also had Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And why did no one really get it? But the only reason why lots of people got it was because there was internet on it, or mostly because there was Sonic Adventure. But that was all. And also, this is the reason why. I think it was because of the PS2, because that sold 150 million copies, which I always see at thrift stores. The Sega, the PlayStation 2 games. I see it everywhere, at every store, every thrift store. I really do. When you go to a thrift store, you're going to see dozens of them. So, yeah. And also the GameCube, yeah, I didn't do that well. It only had like 21 million copies. So I guess that was sort of a big letdown for Nintendo and Sega, but mostly for Sega. Because guess what? They stopped making consoles. Yeah, they actually stopped making consoles. This was just big. They weren't going to make consoles anymore, but they were can still make games for other consoles. But then in 2006, what you probably don't notice, I learned this like 1 month ago. I was actually really surprised. You know how lately Sonic games has like always been bad? You want to know why? Well, when they were making Sonic 06 or after, I think after when they made Sonic 06, there was so much reviews about it of how bad it was. So instead, the creator of Sonic left Sega, and he started working for Nintendo. That's how Sonic 06, how bad it was. Yeah, the creator of Sonic was actually working for Sonic games, but then he just left the company because he actually said that he didn't like how the company was doing with Sonic. So that's another Sega letdown. And yeah, so Sega keeps making games for other consoles, but then right now they're bankrupt. Tell you the truth, they're not really doing that well right now. And also, they're not gonna really. I think the CEO, which is the president of, not the president of USA. Well, the president of Sega said this. He said, that we're not gonna play. We're not gonna make console games anymore or handheld games. We're just gonna make mobile games. So hopefully they do really good at mobile games. Because I think Sonic Dash is an awesome game. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So, anyways, hopefully you miss Sega. I think back in the early 90s with the Sega Genesis, it was probably the best time ever for Sega. And it will probably never happen again. So, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and bye.